Isn't this an exciting way to start the week? Hey, Caryl, welcome to the Leaders Who Care series.
Well, thanks. Great to be here.
Well, I think people are going to find it really quick that you definitely deserve to be here. So let's start like this. If you could briefly introduce yourself, not the business part, but where you're from, where you are now, family. I know that's got some big stuff going on there. Maybe something you've never told anybody you want to reveal now to the world. I don't know, but let's start with that.
Sure. So I'm Caryl Stern. I am sitting in New York today, although my home is Arkansas, Bentonville, Arkansas. And I am a mom and a grandmom. I have two grandchildren, 14 and 9, and three sons, one of whom obviously dad of the two, and then two others, all of whom are currently in New York.
All right, and that's why you're there. And you have the newest edition, right?
We have a brand new edition. I have two new nephews, both my grandnephews, actually. They're not nephews, they're grandnephews. Both my niece and my nephew each had a child in the past couple of weeks, Adrian and Ethan, both really exciting, just really fun. And Adrian has my father's Hebrew name, and Ethan it's named after my dad. So both were really special to me.
Yeah, those are proud moments that you got to cherish all the time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just to see my almost 90-year-old mom hold her great grandchildren has been in and of itself phenomenal.
What a joy that is. You don't get to do that too often. That's fantastic.
Yeah, really
And
is.
your dad must be proud, looking down and all that.
I'm sure he is. I'm sure he is.
Yeah, it's quite a miracle. We all, I have three boys and daughter-in-law, and joking with them the other day, saying, "Man, you guys used to be so cute."
We actually cleaned up photos this past weekend, and that's why I'm in New York. We're kind of going through stuff in our house and found photos, and I said the same thing. And I said, God, my kids were really cute. Like, what happened?
Yes, it happens. But Mazel Tov again. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
And then speaking of kids, so what were you like as a kid and teenager? Were you the first to try stuff? Were you that type of girl, or did you play music, sports? Were you a volunteer? What was up?
So I was definitely a child of the day and age in which I grew up. I was born in the late 50s and was a child of the 60s and was definitely the troublemaker in the family. Had an older brother who was a straight A student, went to an Ivy League college, was captain of the basketball team, spent Friday evenings playing in a game and then sitting home with my parents and his girlfriend. And I was the one that was always in trouble. And my father used to say he just didn't know what to do with me. I definitely felt like life was out there and I was going to experience it all. I think it's made me a much calmer adult because I did it all as a teenager. But it was like fun, great years, and exciting. And I was not an athlete at all in high school or elementary school, not at all. And my day girls didn't play sports. The only sport you could play competitively was field hockey. Wasn't very interesting to me. But in college, I swam on the swim team, and I was a painter. I always had a sketch pad in my hand, and I used to write long, dramatic poetry when I was a teenager.
Well, it's interesting, and we'll talk about threads a little bit. It's interesting how the things we do as a kid unknowingly somehow come forward, and it's all about experiences, as we talk about a lot, that come forward and some way put you towards the right position, the right thing you should be doing, and gives you those experiences are valuable. So tell us about your starting journey. You started with studio art education at SUNY, and then
Yeah.
master's, doctorate, higher ed. What intrigued you to go down that path?
Well, I'm going to start before that because, and I probably should have said this even when you asked what I was like as a kid. So my mom was a child of the Holocaust and came to this country at the age of 6 with her brother, who was 4, without their parents, raised in an orphanage for a couple of years. And as a result, my mother's attitude about her life being spared was always proud to be an American, proud that she was in a country that was allowing her to be who she was, and also adamant about standing up for the things you believed in. And so I grew up in a very activist household. We were active on the civil rights movement. We were active around Soviet Jewry. We were active about environment stuff. And so my mom was very much, she was a stay-at-home mom. We tease her that she was Donna Reed. She used to come home,
Young people have no idea who Donna Reed is.
it's true. No, I know my kids have no reference for Donna Reed, but she was the epitome of the stay-at-home mom. And my mother used to 5 o'clock every day take a bath, put on a clean dress and makeup with an apron to cook dinner for my father before he came home. And all of us had to be, we all had to have had our baths and be at that dinner table. And my dad was a doctor, and we had family dinner together every night. You had to be there. When we got older, we didn't always have to be there, but Shabbat dinner, Friday night, we had to be there. And we relished that Friday nights we ate in the dining room, we lit candles, we drank wine. It was, I had a very idyllic childhood. I really did. I was very, very blessed to have parents who genuinely cared. And the fact that I was a painter or a sketcher, or drawer, whatever, was really encouraged. I had an aunt who was an artist, and I had oil paints by the time I was 10 or 11 years old. And anything I drew or painted hung somewhere in the house. And,
Of course.
That's why I ended up studying studio art. I mean, it was the thing that kept me in college, was the fact that I was painting, and by my senior year had my own little space in the studio and was stretching these huge canvases and doing all kinds of crazy work. And it was great. I loved it. But somewhere in my senior year of college, I realized that I needed to figure out how I was going to support myself. And I thought the Metropolitan was going to be waiting for me, but they weren't. I did sell a number of paintings my senior year of college, enough to afford Europe on $10 a day that summer. But the Metropolitan wasn't. So somewhere around March of my senior year, I thought, I wonder what I'm going to do when I graduate. And I went to see a career counselor, and she had me write down everything I did for a week, like everything. And then to write down, did I do it because I had to do it or I wanted to do it? Did I organize it, or did somebody else organize it? Well, for a whole week, I did this diary for her. And she pointed out, it was really an interesting thing, because I was very politically active in those days. And she pointed out that I was constantly organizing activities and organizing a group. And if we were going to go out to dinner, I was the one making the plan. And if all of this stuff. So she said, you ought to go into organizing of some kind. So I decided I wanted to be a student activities director, because I was very friendly with my student activities director at the time. So I accepted a teaching fellowship at Western Illinois University to get a master's in student personnel. My father thought I had lost my mind. He still hadn't come to terms with the fact that I got a degree in painting. So, and now I had this crazy field he'd never heard of, at a university he'd never heard of. I mean, it was like, what are you doing? And then I got into Teachers College at Columbia as well. But in those days, living in Harlem was not an easy place. And the classes were at night, and my father didn't want me living in the city, and I didn't want to commute in and out. And so I accepted this teaching fellowship. It was a free ride. I took it. And I moved out to Macomb, Illinois, and I did my master's in college student personnel. And I got very friendly with one of my professors, a guy named Roger Bartnick, and I adored him. He was an amazing teacher and just kind of opened my mind to a lot of things, and became the professor that I wanted to be very much. So I left Western. I got a job at Northwestern University, wonderful institution, running their non-credit coursework. So I took a program that was about 100 classes. By the time I left, it was much closer to 1,000 classes. And it was a great job. I literally ran around Chicago and if there was a really good bluegrass band, I'd say, want to teach class? And they would agree to it, And I set up this class that was about exploring the restaurants of Chicago. And it was like a whole group of people, and we would go out to dinner and the chef would talk to us. I had a great time. I met all kinds of crazy people in Chicago. And I started my doctorate so I could become the professor that Roger was. And unfortunately, about halfway through my doctorate, Roger committed suicide. And it was horrible for me, really horrible for me, because I thought he had the life I wanted.
Wow.
Since he was obviously mourning the loss of a dear friend and the horror of what he did to his own family. And then very selfishly kind of mourning the loss of what am I going to do with my life? Because my life plan wasn't real anymore. It was a really tough time for me. I had really bad anxiety attacks. It was really a bad time. And I was like 3/4 of the way through a doctoral program. So I finished my coursework and I had to spend a year of full-time study. So I gave up this phenomenal job at Northwestern to become a dorm director at DePaul University. People thought I had lost my mind. But it was the only way I could live free and go to school. And I did that. And then I still had more coursework. So then I took a job at a restaurant called Peralta's Cafe. I used to go in at like, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, help prepare the baking stuff for the morning, waitress for the morning, and then they would pack me lunch and dinner to take with me to school. And I finished all my coursework and I finished all my exams, and I got an opportunity to co-author a book.
Wow.
So I never finished my dissertation. I've since published 3 books, but I've never finished my dissertation. So I'm ABD, and I have had the privilege of getting 5 honorary doctorates,
Right.
5 different things actually, over the years, but it's the only thing in my life I didn't finish. And I actually tried to go back and finish it about 10 years ago. I wrote to Loyola University and I asked, and it was so long ago that they were going to make me retake all my classes. And I thought, no, I'm not
Not a
gonna
good move. Well,
do it. So
those doctorate, honorary doctorate of human letters, I guess they call it, right?
I have a couple of those. I have a doctorate of law. I don't even know what the third, there's another one, but I don't even remember what it is. But yeah, so I have them, but I still never finished the one I really worked for, which I have to say bothers me. So I went into higher ed. I ended up dean at Polytechnic University in New York.
Mm.
And there were race riots in Brooklyn that year. And I got asked by the borough president to help bring the community back together. So I volunteered and ultimately ended up chairing this task force for the borough president. In the meantime, the Anti-Defamation League was starting to think about the fact that their belief that children are taught to hate. And since they're taught to hate, could we unteach that or prevent that learning? And they offered me an opportunity based on the work I had done in Brooklyn to come run this crazy program called A World of Difference for 1 year in New York. And it was a project with WCBS Channel 2, which was patterned after a program WCVB had done in Boston, where you produced original on-air TV work, you paired it with curriculum, teachers would use it as edutainment. Kids would be assigned to watch the programs with their parents, all kinds of things in the school. What was exciting about it is the teachers couldn't buy the materials. They had to go through a training program to get them. So we were actually teaching them how to use the materials, which made it a very live curriculum. So I did that for a year. I left my dean's job again. People thought I'd lost my mind. I made
At
this.
least you're consistent in how they think about
Yeah.
you.
That's the theme of my career. Lots of moves that everybody thought were insane.
Really.
Went to ADL, and at the end of the year, they renewed my contract for another year. So I stayed a second year. And then I was supposed to go away. But in that second year, we began to replicate the program across the country, ultimately replicating it in 35 cities with 35 television affiliates, about 60 hours in total of original TV programming. And the program got a great reputation, but we had to figure out how to pay for it, because up until then it was charitable philanthropic grants. And I wrote a business plan that if we took this idea of training to prevent bigotry and we brought it to corporate America, and you have to understand the letters DEI didn't exist, there wasn't diversity training like there is today, that corporate America would pay for it. And we could take the proceeds and use that to run the school-based program. And I brought it to Abe Foxman, the executive director. He didn't particularly care for it, but the chair of the ADL, David Strassler at the time, liked it. And he gave me a personal loan to launch this business.
Nice.
And he lent me $350,000, 5 years to pay it back, no interest. So I started using the ADL context. We went to AT&T to pitch them on this idea. And again, no idea what this idea was. We hadn't even written the program at this point. My training partner, Kevin, and I went to AT&T. We sold him 70 days of training. We paid David back his loan within about 2 years. And the program became self-sustaining for quite some time. And I ended up doing the DEI training design for the CIA, for the FBI, for DuPont Works, for AT&T, for, I mean, a host of corporations up and down the coast and all over the country. Then we took it global. There were riots in Rostock, Germany, and the chancellor reached out to the ADL, and Abe Foxman dispatched us to go to Rostock. So we wrote a program for Rostock, which then became a program for Bremen and Berlin. Then Austria, the Minister of Interior invited us, so we brought it to Austria. And then we brought it to the Middle East, and then we brought it to Japan, and then we brought it to Latin America, ultimately 8 EU countries. 450,000 teachers have now used that curriculum. Over 20 million kids have been exposed to it. It was a phenomenally exciting, I was too stupid to know I couldn't do it, so we did it.
That's the best. That's the best way to go. So I want to ask you something about that. You know, we founded Fifth Element on the premise, on the basis of actually that leaders in their businesses can do way better when they're doing good, which has taken decades for people to totally get that, but we're slowly getting. Obviously, you've been a clear believer of that from the beginning, whether didn't know it or not. You were. You told me once about the commitment you took to learn before you take on a new challenge and role. All that you had to learn before taking it on. And that so aligns with what our clients expect on the side of where we help them with impact, but we also help them attract the top talent. But the only way they can attract the top talent is they want the people that have the experiences, that have learned to take it to the next level. So can you just share about that, how you knew that before, and that, you know, your ability to attract the best people who can continue the impact, but it's because they have the experiences or the commitment to learn to take a company to the next level, and it helps the business.
It totally does, because, you know, I left ADL, I went to UNICEF. I knew nothing about humanitarian aid. I had never even stepped foot in a developing nation when I went to UNICEF. Now, I went as number 2, and number 1 left 3 weeks later. And the board looked at me and said, "We can't make you number 1. You don't know anything about this." And I said, well, they offered me the chance to be part of the search for my new boss. And I said, no, I didn't come here to get a new boss. You know, I came here to someday run it. So I want to compete. And so I spent a year, and it was really informative to the rest of my career, learning from everyone that I could, everything there was to know about humanitarian aid. I went to Darfur. My first trip to a developing nation was Mozambique, but the second one was to Darfur. I mean, I went to in the heart of a really rough and difficult situation and just sat at the feet of people who could teach me. It not only taught me what I needed to know to ultimately land the job as president and CEO, which I did get the privilege to do for 13 plus years, but it also taught me that not everyone you hire has to know everything substantively, that there are things you need passion. I mean, in my business, you need passion. You need to believe in what you're doing, and it has to be honest commitment, because if you don't believe, you can't bring anyone along with you. And you need leadership skills. You need to know how to organize. You need to know how to motivate. You need to know how to build a team. But you don't have to have the specific skill to do the work. You can hire that. And I did at UNICEF what I called the 1/5 brain. I created a team. I took down the pyramid. I created a circle and hired what I couldn't do. I hired a person who had really extensive humanitarian aid to run all my programs and to teach me. I hired the CFO had been there. He was the only person I kept from the original team. He was amazing, and I'm not a good numbers person. He is. And he taught me how to read a P&L. He just taught me everything I needed to know. And I had the confidence that his numbers were right. I never had to second guess his numbers. I hired a phenomenal fundraiser. And learned how to fundraise by watching him. And we collectively formed this team. And it was some of the most fun years. When we took over UNICEF, it was raising $200 million a year, UNICEF USA, not global.
Mhm.
And when we left UNICEF USA, it was raising over 600 million. It actually just broke the $1 billion mark this past year. But and again, similar to ADL, it was the excitement of being part of something, the belief in ourselves, the spirit of a team doing it together, and too stupid to know it can't be done.
Well, it's
But
interesting. Sorry, because I compare a lot of
yeah,
things to sports, but it's happening in life right now, even more so. Players will give their heart and soul to a coach that trusts them, believes in what they're doing, and is someone that will let them do their expertise because it's not their expertise as the CEO. It's exactly what you're talking about. And these days, especially with remote workers, the trust has to become even more so of those people. And I think a big part of the reason you were so successful with them is they felt like you were letting them be the best they could be as part of this team.
absolutely. Not only letting them be the best they could be, but having them help me to be the best I could be.
Right.
It's interesting. I think that's a key ingredient. I've thought a lot about this. I think true leaders have good EQ. I think that's
Right.
probably the number one skill. I was asked as I'm getting ready to step down from my current role, what do I think is the number one thing? Has to be a relationship-based person, because people work for people. People donate to people. You know, you have to work in the nonprofit space, especially. I think you have to be the kind of person that acts with integrity, is trustworthy and trusting, both.
Right.
It has to be a two-way street. You have to be receptive to learning, and then you have to also accept that your staff don't come to you fully baked, at least the ones I hire. Okay. They're kind of, the oven's warm. I always say the oven's warm. You're going to be held accountable, but you're not fully baked. And I have to create a work environment where if you don't know how to do something, or you're not sure you're doing the right thing, that you feel comfortable asking and seeking assistance. And that's how I'm going to get the best out of you. And that's how we're all going to grow together.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. And that then is welcomed by the corporate leaders, the family office leaders, when they see that honesty, that authenticity, that passion. I have to believe, you said it before, that increases the chances significantly that those leaders will jump on board with you, will partner with you, and they'll realize it's actually good for their business.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because right now I'm talking to a number of CEOs who are, for the first time, or maybe not, well, for the first time in an organized way and with intentionality, looking at purpose, not just at product, and not just at income.
Mhm.
Bottom line is being measured not just by the amount of money being brought in. And strategically asking me, a number of them, so how do I write my purpose plan? Not just how do I write my product plan, or my, ultimate retirement plan, and it's an interesting question, because I've always been internally driven by purpose. So I haven't had to strategically take a step back and think about how do you plan for purpose. And I've been very lucky to have had teams around me that were as driven as I was.
Well, and then you get that again. You get that in sports too. I know a lot of sports execs and whatnot, and the players don't vie to win the championship by how much money they're making. They win the
Right.
championship because they want to win the championship for their team, for their families, for the fans, whatever. What's on the check is important, and you need that economic impact. But that's not what wins the championships. And I had one executive that told me, our goal is to win the championship every year. We're not idiots. We know that's not going to happen anymore. But our mandate is to have winning seasons for every single person in our organization every year.
I love it. It brings to mind two thoughts. I mean, it's like you look at March Madness, there's always a Cinderella team. And,
Well,
and the Cinderella team is always because they are so driven to win that game. The passion and the taste of it is so strong. So I think of that. And then what's the name of the book? I had it on my desk, but I don't have it in front of me now. It's a book about happiness, actually. It's a good book. I'll have to dig it out.
I'm sure.
But there's a quote in the book about true leaders don't have to be the tallest plant in the garden. They have to build the best greenhouse. And I subscribe to that 100%. I think it is understanding some of your plants need shade, some of your plants need light, they all need water. You know, some are going to flower sometimes, some are going to flower all the time, some are never going to produce a flower, but they're all part of the garden. And you do not have to be the tallest. Somebody else can be the tallest and you can still be a phenomenal leader. So I think that that's what it's about, you know, and I think that's the fun of being the leader.
Well, and people, one thing I remember this thing too, they talked about the thing that fills people's hearts and souls more than anything is belonging. And you want to be really top leaders want to be on a team in the team that is making stuff happen. I interviewed a CEO maybe over a year ago now, and he said, Mark, I'm having the best time I've ever had as a CEO, and we're performing better because I can actually even be emotional. Don't have to pretend I know everything anymore. I can trust my people to do this and this and this. He said, and it wasn't even rocket science, but I'm so happy I can do that.
And I do think, you know, obviously, and I was talking to someone who's a brand new CEO who's experiencing the stress of being a brand new CEO. Clearly, there is moments that you have to act that until you're in those seats, nobody else understands.
Mm-hmm.
The lonely at the top thing is real, because you want to be part of the team, you want to be deferential to your team, you want to be collaborative. And then there are those moments where you got to just pull your bootstraps up and say, this is what we're going to do. Yeah. And those moments run afoul of kind of how you normally operate. And I think those are the hardest moments for a boss.
They are. An entrepreneurial, serial entrepreneur guy told me a while back, he said, the fact that I spoke to my employees all the time when things weren't going well or I had to make a hard decision, they were there before I even had to ask them for me.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's true, because the measure of success for me when I was at UNICEF of what was like the highest moment as the CEO for me, there would be a disaster and we would have to drop everything and just move to disaster mode. And I think it was the Haiti earthquake, actually. And I knew I had staff that were going to be 24 hours that day, the 24 hours following the earthquake and the next night. I knew they were going to be there 24 hours. So I had theater tickets for that first evening. I worked all day. I went to the theater. I said to my husband, let's bring them coffee and donuts because they're going to, there's probably 4 or 5 people still in the office. It's midnight. Let's bring them some coffee and donuts. So we stopped. We picked up donuts. We picked up coffee. We walked in that office. You would have thought it was normal working hours. That's how many people came in of their own accord because they felt compelled to be part of the solution. You don't get that if they don't feel valued. You don't get that if you haven't created it beforehand. And if they haven't helped to create it. This is not, Caryl was a brilliant leader. I had an amazing team that knew how to engender that kind of commitment and enthusiasm from their teams.
Without a doubt. Hey, that's winning the championship. That's how
Yeah, that's it. That's winning the championship.
So can you describe, you got your, ADL, UNICEF, now the Walton Family Foundation. There's somewhat of a thread in there around children, obviously, which is awesome. And that's something people get really passionate about. As you know, we were in Aspen with UNICEF, with Starling Foundation, a bunch of this last week. And, talking about children is something that really hits home. So can you talk about how relationships, as you're saying, are invaluable, wherever the journey takes you? And that thread of children, it actually reminds me, you talked a little bit of legacy, but Pat Riley used to say, my legacy is when all my assistant coaches and associate coaches become head coaches, type of deal.
True. I look around right now at I call them kids, they're in their 50s and 60s, but that the young kids who worked for me at different points, they're all running major organizations, like my direct reports from UNICEF, that original team. Right. They're either retired because they've aged out, they weren't all younger than me, or they are the CEOs of major organizations right now. And that makes me feel so excited and so proud. But in terms of the theme of children, I had the privilege in my career to work for at least little periods of time in 45 countries, some of them industrialized, some of them developing, etc., some of them somewhere in between. we all want the same things for our kids.
Right.
This isn't defined by economics, you know, we want them to be safe. We want them to be healthy. We want them to eat a hot meal. We want to tuck them in under a warm blanket. We
Right.
want them to dream big dreams. And as parents or grown-ups in their lives, we want to be part of making those dreams happen. And that's not defined by economics. And it may be different economically, you know, maybe I dream that my kids will be wealthy enough to support me in my retirement, and the mother in Sierra Leone dreams that her child will have 2 goats instead of one. Like, you know, but we want the best for our kids, and we want to be part of making it happen. And children don't get to pick where they're born. They don't get to, you know, or if we do, what kid in their right mind would pick famine and warfare, you know? So I feel like the commitment to children is not a hard sell to anybody. And I have just seen, like, you know, the most brilliant creativity and innovation. It's what gives me hope, is talking to young people, hearing their ideas, seeing where they're taking the world. You know, this generation coming up, you know, Walton just did this huge Gen Z research this past year. They're optimistic. They believe in the American dream still, but they believe they're going to make it happen. They're not sitting back for the country to make it happen. And that, to me, is amazing. I mean, that just, like, I want to join that team with them.
That's a great point. You see, that's what talent, whether it's in sports or work or nonprofit, they want to be on a winning team. It goes back to the winning seasons consistently. And I do find that also because not only interview a lot of young leaders who care, but young people. And every era has us young people. I was in the same generation, 60s and all that with you. We all wanted to make a difference, and we tried. There's a different urgency right now to make a difference and make stuff happen. Part of it's kind of climate and all sorts of things, but they really are pushing forward. I think that's what you're talking about positively.
Pushing forward, and they're demanding that we get better.
Right.
You know, like, they're looking at us and saying, hey, you guys had a responsibility here. You screwed up. And, you know, where's my role model? And you know what? If you're not going to give it to me, we're just going to build our own. And I love it. I think it's so exciting to watch.
So that leads me to another. You give me good segues. I appreciate that. So, you know, the fourth industrial revolution is really about tech, AI, all sorts of stuff going on. But the fifth is really about humanity, is what's happening. And that's partly one of the reasons for our name, actually. We focus on impact and talent and how they have to be in harmony, get results type of thing, whatever organization you're in. Can you share experiences you've had of how you've engaged partners, all stakeholders, that actually do see that it's better business results, aside from the short-term thinking of, and I'm an ex-CPA from Deloitte, of the quarterly financial results, which I think can get in the way of so much, but anyway, that's another conversation. But, you know, how you've engaged with partners and stakeholders, and they understand it's better for business. They understand it's better to attract and keep the talent. But the other thing I want to also note that you just mentioned is, what we find is, if you do all that, you know, spouses, partners, they come home and they either say, work sucked, I don't even know what we did today, I'm exhausted, give me a beer, I'm going to sit on the sofa, and the kids hear that. Or they come home and say, guys, you got to sit down, like you said, dinner with your family all the time, we got to sit down, I got to tell you what happened today. I got to tell you, we're getting ready to volunteer on this over there. I'm probably going to get a bonus because my boss let me do this. That was so cool. And the kids hear that. Comment on that.
Okay, on all of that. Huh?
Oh,
Well, I do agree that the fifth industrial revolution is purpose and impact. I do agree with you on that. And you see it across the country. And I think that what you don't yet see is the how, but you do see the what. You know, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, we saw a lot of financial commitment to fight racism, to support the Black community in particular, but in terms of all of the DEs and Is, but without a plan. And I think we learned a little bit from that. Lots of dollars committed, not as many dollars released. We're not seeing the impact. We're not, you know, and I'm hopeful that may make some demands on all of us who sit in positions of leadership to think about the how, not just the what.
right.
I think as CEOs, we're being called upon in ways we've never been called upon before. And, you know, the Edelman Trust Barometer for the first time last year showed that faith in CEOs and in business is higher than faith in nonprofits, which is kind of fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And I attribute some of that to the fact that we don't market ourselves and they do, but that's a whole nother point. But having sat in those rooms with CEOs and talked about how we tackle this, most of us weren't educated on this. We don't know how to do it. And we're finding our way. And the things that I'm finding interesting is that most of us are settling into do I have agency over this situation? Can I really have impact? You know, if I'm a food company and there's a famine, I've got agency. Okay. But if I don't, I can use my voice, but to what end? And if I use my voice every day, my voice doesn't have the value that it had before. So it's really a look at all of that. And I think you will see most corporations coming back to, do I have agency? At least I'm hearing that out of the mouths of most of the CEOs that I talk to. I think that we are using our voices differently. I write a Friday message. It's not always out on Friday. It's a joke with my staff. You can get a Friday message on Tuesday. You can get it on Thursday. Some weeks you may not get it at all, but it's called the Friday message. And it's kind of my, stream of consciousness on whatever I'm thinking about that week.
Yeah.
And what's good about it is it allows me to write it without it being the perspective of the entire company. And everybody understands that. Now, there are topics I don't speak out on because I know my workforce is divided and we don't have agency. So I think that's important. When the DEI eruption happened, when George Floyd was murdered and we all really wanted to do something. I mean, I've spent so much of my career in civil rights that I really wanted to use the power of the foundation. I looked around and I said, do I have agency? And you know what? I don't. We're not a social justice foundation. I have no social justice experts on my team. This is not what we do. So instead, how do I use what we do to move the needle on social justice? And I brought in somebody who was a social justice expert, and I put her on staff for 3 years to help us continuously ask that question and to teach us some things. And I took 15 staff and I sent them to Cornell through the DEI certificate program so that I could better equip us with some skills, but stay true to who we are and what we do. And again, great learning lessons for me. We did some things well, we did some things not well, but I think that it is important as leaders that we recognize what we're good at and what we're not, what we can and can't have impact on. If it's really important to us, you go get the skills and you figure out how to do it. But in the moment, do the assessment first.
Yeah, it's brilliant, and it goes again to my thing with sports is not everybody's the scorer, not everybody's the defense, not everybody's the goalie or whatever, but you need all of them to win the championship.
Absolutely, and recognize that sometimes you got to recruit. I've told this story before, but when there was the storm in Puerto Rico, I was the CEO of UNICEF USA. Puerto Rico was not a developing nation, so I had no staff on the ground. UNICEF Global had no staff on the ground. And now we had a horrific storm and the American people were saying, okay, Caryl, what's UNICEF going to do? And I didn't know what UNICEF was going to do. So I kind of looked around and said, all right, let's find somebody who's doing really good stuff and let's help them raise the money and support their efforts because they've got an army and I don't. And then Governor Cuomo had done something no one else had done. He flew down there and he met with the governor and he asked, what do you need? As opposed to the pejorative, I'll give you things you may not need. I mean, I watched winter coats arrive in Haiti, in a nation that was never going to see winter. So, I envied that. So I called the governor and to my amazement, he called me right back. And I said, what do you got? What are you doing? And he goes, here's what I've got. In true political quote, here's what I got. I got the Attorney General vetting space, giving me space at JFK. He's cleared, warehouse, not the Attorney General, Homeland Security has cleared space for me at JFK for whatever we collect. And he said, and I got the Attorney General of the state of New York on the ground in Puerto Rico, vetting organizations so that whatever we got, we can create a distribution channel, but I don't really know how to do that. And he said, I don't have any money to make all this happen. And I've never done something like this before. He said to me, what do you got? And I said, well, I'll tell you, Governor. I know what to do because I've been in storm response before. So I know what they need. I even know where that stuff is right now, already collected, and it's sitting in a warehouse in Italy right now.
Yeah.
And I said, but what I don't got, I said, I don't know how to get it there. I'm not a logistics expert. And I don't, and I'm going to need some really quick, fancy foots to get the clearance at customs to get it here. So I said, but what I also got is the CEO of UPS on my board, and we're going to call him.
Exactly.
We did. And he came to the table, and Governor and I looked at him and said, so what do you got? And he said, well, I've got the logistics expertise, but better than that, I've got 500 drivers on the island of Puerto Rico with 500 trucks, and they've got something nobody has. They've got fuel. So I said, all right, I know how to raise the money. I know where the stuff is. Governor, you've got the space to collect it all.
Yeah.
You can clear the customs laws for us. And Jim, you can get it to Puerto Rico. When you get it there, the Attorney General will have vetted organizations. They can do the distribution. We were the first ones to get supplies to the remote areas, but none of us could do that alone.
Of course. No, I mean, that's true partnerships, SDG 17, if you will. That's the whole ballgame. And
Exactly.
and if ego gets in the way, then it's horrendous to let ego get in the way, to try to do it on your own. So congratulations on that. In LA, we say leave them wanting more so you can do a sequel. So we need to do that. But I have one last question here. With everything that happened the last few years, COVID and everything the last few years, one of my clients actually told me in 2021, he said, Mark, the year 2020 was like the year that flew by slowly. What a crazy comment.
Perfect, yeah.
Exactly. But with all that said, what are you most grateful for? And also, what are you most hopeful for?
On a personal level, I'm very grateful for the man that I married, who kept the fire going and the lights on as I've run around the world and helped me to together raise 3 amazing sons. And I'm grateful to have had the parents that I had and to grow up in a time when it felt safe, something that I think my children never had. And I think that, you and I both of the same generation we went out in the morning, we came home for dinner. We didn't worry in between, and nobody worried about us. Like, they knew we were safe.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for those things. I think they were the real gifts that our generation got. But what I'm hopeful for, I'm really hopeful that this generation that's coming up really believes and is going to support the candidate who's willing to cross the aisle, the candidate who's going to be issues driven, not party driven.
Right.
Well, redefinition of collaboration, which is what I'm really championing right now at the foundation, that it's not about common ground, it's about common solutions. We don't have to agree on everything. We just got to figure out a way to work together towards goals we agree on. And, so it's not about gun control, pro con, it's about less violence in our schools. We can agree on that one, common solutions. And I am watching a generation that will demand that, and I think will make that happen.
Super well said. I think it's a great way to go forward. And instead of arguing about our differences, let's find the solutions. So I think we've shown everybody why you're on the Leaders Who Care series. I'm pretty sure.
Thank you.
So thank you for a leader who cares.
This was fun.
It's always fun. And especially when you find solutions, it becomes more fun. And if you can make money at the same time, it's even more fun.
Exactly. The trifecta.
Thank you so much for being on the series. Really appreciate it. And we'll go from here. Who knows what's next?
Onward and upward. Thanks so much.
You bet.